When most people want to become more productive, they start looking for better systems, time management hacks, or ways to reorganize their calendar. The problem is that a better schedule won't help if it's filled with the wrong work. That's why the most effective CEOs start somewhere else. Before they decide when to do something, they get clear on what deserves their attention, where their time has the greatest impact, and what shouldn't reach them in the first place. Because the secret isn't fitting more into your week, it's making sure that the right things get into it. A perfect example is one of my past clients. When he came to me, he was working 60 to 80 hours a week. But when we broke down where he was spending his time, what I found was that more than 80% of it was reactive. That meant that most of his days were spent putting out fires, solving other people's problems, and working on things that shouldn't have needed him. By the end of our time together, though, he was working less than 40 hours, with close to 90% of his time spent proactively. We didn't do that by finding a better calendar app. We changed what deserved his attention. We removed him from what shouldn't have depended on him, and we rebuilt the way that he operated. We did that using what I call the 4D CEO time framework, which stands for define, diagnose, design, and defend. I'm Byron Morrison. I'm the author of The Effective CEO 2.0. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through that framework so you can manage your time like a highly effective CEO. Before you can decide how to allocate your time, though, you firstly need to be clear on what you should actually be doing. Because when your role isn't clearly defined, your time gets filled by whatever's screaming the loudest or feels most important in the moment. That's why so many overwhelmed CEOs can work 60-plus-hour weeks. They stay busy all day, yet they still look back on Friday wondering what they actually moved forward. The issue isn't usually a lack of effort, it's that the role has never been clearly defined for the stage the business is now at. So before you touch your calendar, you need to get clear on three things. The first is, what is your zone of genius? What are your unique strengths that give you an unfair advantage? This could be anything from sales to strategy, product, or building relationships. You need to understand where your specific strengths create the most value so that you can spend more of your time operating in that zone. The second is, where does your time have the greatest impact? Looking at your current vision, targets, and challenges, where in the business right now would more of your time move the needle the most in terms of growth, revenue, or stability? That could be anything from developing your leadership team to fundraising, business development, or removing the key roadblocks that are holding things back. The third is what can only be done by you. These are the responsibilities that genuinely require your authority, judgment, or leadership. Could be anything from setting direction to aligning the team, making major decisions, or managing key stakeholder relationships. Once you've answered those three questions, then you have a clear picture of what your role actually looks like. That then becomes the lens that you use to evaluate everything you take on. So when a task, meeting, or problem lands in front of you, you can stop and ask, does this align with my defined role, or should it be handled by someone else? Without that clarity, it's too easy to get pulled into something that feels important in the moment. That's why part two is diagnose. Every week, I speak to overwhelmed CEOs who tell me how busy they are. Yet most are so focused on getting through the day that they don't actually know where their time is going. That's why on application calls for my Evolve CEO program, one question that I always ask is, if you look back on an average day or week, how much of your time was spent on tasks and problems that shouldn't have needed you? For many, it's the first time that they realize that 60, 70, or even upwards of 80% of their time isn't being used where it should be. To get out of that trap, what you need to do is audit the last 2 to 4 weeks by going back through your calendar, your meetings, emails, and the problems you were pulled into, and then ask yourself two questions. First, did this move you closer to your goals and targets? If not, then you need to question whether it needed your attention or why it took up your time in the first place. And second, did this need to be done by you? Because something can be important without it needing your personal involvement. From there, you can create what I call a not to-do list. This is a list of the meetings, tasks, decisions, and responsibilities that you're committing to no longer being involved in. then you can use that same filter every day and week to audit your to-do list before you plan or take on anything else. So stop and ask yourself, is this getting me closer to where I want to be? And does this need to be done by me? I regularly find that by going through this process, it can free up anything from 5 to 15 hours a week. That's why the few minutes you spend getting intentional with what you take on can have more impact than another productivity system that's layered on top of the wrong workload. By the end of Diagnose, you should be clear on what stays with you, what needs to be delegated, and what needs to be removed altogether. Now you can then rebuild your week around what remains. That's why part 3 is design. This is where most productivity advice starts. Create a to-do list, block your calendar, batch similar tasks, protect your mornings. Yes, those things can help, but they only work after you've decided what should actually be in your week. Ideally, what you want to do is start with as blank a calendar as possible. And I go step by step through how to structure all of this in my book, The Effective CEO 2.0, and it also comes with a free digital planner. You can grab it using the link in the description below. What you need to do though is start with your 90-day goals and targets and ask yourself, what are the key things that I need to get done this week to be one step closer? As an example, I had a client going through a major fundraise and we worked out that he needed around 15 hours a week to secure the next round. His focus and energy were highest in the morning, and that was when he was least likely to be interrupted. So what we did was we protected 9 until 12 every single morning for the work required to secure the round. The key is building your calendar around what matters long term, because if you don't, it'll get overridden by what feels urgent that week. Once your priorities are protected, then you can add in reoccurring tasks, meetings, and commitments that are part of your role. Things like leadership team meetings, one-to-ones, time for strategy. Then schedule your personal commitments too. Time for the gym, family time, date night, or whatever genuinely matters outside the business. Once this is in place, you can then look honestly at what is left. This is key, as I find that people massively overestimate how much time and capacity they have, which is why they keep overloading themselves. I saw this happening with a client who, when we met, he told me he felt like he was running backwards on a treadmill and like he could never catch up. Once I took him through this process, though, what I uncovered was that he only had about 10 focused hours available each week after everything else was added. Yet he was trying to cram in work that needed 40 plus hours. That's why he thought he had a discipline problem, when in reality, he was overloading himself with unrealistic expectations about what he could get done. That's why by slowing down to look at this, you can see if your plan is actually feasible. And if not, you need to delegate more, delay, or remove certain tasks. Also think about what mental state a task requires. Is deep thinking, strategy, and problem solving all require a different level of energy than emails or admin. So don't just schedule work where you have time, schedule it where you have the mental bandwidth to do it properly. Because being effective isn't about managing your time better. It's about managing your ability to use that time well. And finally, leave some room for the unexpected. If reactive issues regularly take an hour a day, then you need to account for that rather than hoping they're not going to happen or pretending they're going to disappear. By designing your week with intention, that's how you can protect your highest value work first and make sure what actually matters gets done. Because the perfect plan is meaningless if you drop at the moment something else feels more urgent. That's why the final step is the foundation that holds everything together, which is why part 4 is defend. Because the biggest threat to your time and focus usually comes from 2 places: other people and you. Let's start with other people. One of the most common frustrations I hear from CEOs is that their days are constantly disrupted by people coming to them with decisions, problems, and issues that they should be handling themselves. Often this happens because they've created a culture that lacks ownership, or they're too quick to step in rather than empowering the team to figure it out. That's why you need to do 3 things. First, create clear decision boundaries. People need to know what they can decide independently, what they should decide and update you on, and what genuinely needs your involvement. Second, when someone brings you a problem, don't immediately dive in and fix it. Instead, push it back on them and ask them to come to you with their recommended solution. You're not refusing to help, you're building a team that thinks before just transferring the problem to you. And third, make your availability clear. So many CEOs feel that if they aren't immediately responsive, then they're letting people down, when actually that pattern pulls them away from the work that the business actually needs from them. The way that one client I worked with solved this was every morning he sent a Slack message to his team saying when he was available that day. Yes, it felt uncomfortable at first, but it gave him back control of his day, and the team quickly adapted to it. Now, defending your time isn't only about other people, because the bigger risk is often yourself. Whether it's taking on too much, saying yes to things you shouldn't, choosing easier work over more difficult tasks, or stepping back into something you've already delegated. All of it pulls you away from what only you can do. And a lot of this comes down to identity, because chances are a big part of your success was built on your ability to hustle, grind, and get things done. You thrived on being the fixer and the doer, which is why your self-worth gets tied to what you move forward each day. But the work that now has the greatest impact, like setting direction, strategy, making key decisions, and coaching your team, doesn't give you that same immediate sense of productivity that operational work does. That's why at first it can make you feel guilty or like you should be doing something else. And this is why so many CEOs throw themselves back into the weeds even when they know better. This is one of the biggest things I help clients work through in my Evolve CEO program, because knowing what needs to change and actually changing it are two very different problems. And if you want to find out whether this pattern is showing up in your situation, I created the CEO Evolution Assessment for exactly this. It's a free diagnostic that in 7 minutes will show you whether the way you're currently operating has evolved at the same pace as your business and what needs to shift for you to become the leader your business needs. The link to take is in the description below. So when you look back at your calendar after this video, don't ask how you can fit more into it. Ask what it's showing you. Does it reflect the priorities you said mattered, or does it mainly show whatever reached you first? The reality is you won't get this perfect straight away, and that's okay. That's also why you need to take some time each week to think about what did you move forward and did it actually matter? What did you take on that you should have delegated, and what disrupted your time and focus, and what expectations and boundaries do you need to put in place the next week? That'll help you figure out what you need to keep working on in order to change and get this right. So that's the 4D CEO time framework to help you manage your time like a CEO. If you want to build this into the way that you operate every week, then my book, The Effective CEO 2.0, is the next step. It goes much deeper into how to define your role, remove yourself from lower value work, delegate real ownership, plan around your priorities, and build a business that no longer depends on your constant involvement. It also includes practical strategies on how to run more effective meetings, how to get your team to solve their own problems, defend your time, and manage your energy. You can get a copy on Amazon globally or by using the link in the description below. So I'm curious to hear from you. What are your biggest takeaways from this video, and what do you realize needs to change in how you're currently managing your time? Leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below. And if this video was useful, please hit the like button and subscribe, as every week I put out new videos on how to become a more effective CEO. I've been Byron Morrison. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.